The Commander's Address. Morning light spread across the harbor of Vishakhapatnam as the frigate Dana rested alongside the pier at India's Eastern Naval Command. The water beyond the dock was crowded with warships, gray hulls from dozens of nations gathered for this multinational naval exercise. On the flight deck, the Iranian crew stood assembled in formation. Dark navy uniforms formed straight lines beneath the rising sun. Quiet conversation drifted across the flight deck as sailors waited in formation. Suddenly, a petty officer near the hatch straightened. "Attention on deck!" The words cut across the deck like a whistle. Conversations died instantly. Boots snapped together as the sailors came rigidly to attention. Commander Zari stepped through the hatch and faced the men. "God willing, our participation here will reflect the honor of our Navy," he said. "You have heard the name of this exercise many times already. Milan. In the local language, it means a gathering, a meeting." He gestured toward the harbor. "And that is exactly what this is, a meeting of navies from across the world." Ships from Asia, Europe, and across the Pacific lined the piers, while others rested at anchor beyond the harbor, their flags fluttering in the light breeze. "For the next several days," Zari continued, "this harbor will be filled with sailors from many countries. There will be exchanges between crews, visitors will come aboard our ship, and all of you will have the opportunity to see the city." He paused, letting the words settle. "Get to know the sailors of other nations, learn from them, and let them learn from you." "But remember something." The sailor straightened slightly. "You represent the Islamic Republic of Iran." His voice remained calm but firm. "You will conduct yourselves with discipline and dignity at all times." "Liberty expires at midnight sharp," Zari said. "Anyone returning late will face disciplinary action, officers included." Zari folded his hands behind his back. "You are also aware of the situation facing our country." A quiet tension moved across the deck. "The United States continues its hostile sanctions against our country and speaks openly of military action. Even now, their carrier strike groups are moving toward the Middle East." The sailors listened carefully. "When this exercise ends," Zari continued, "we will return home. Our duty will be to defend our nation if that moment comes." He let the words hang in the air. "But here in India, our mission is different." He glanced once more toward the harbor filled with ships. "Here, our mission is goodwill, professional respect between sailors, respect for our hosts, and gratitude to Allah for allowing us to travel safely across the oceans to India." Several sailors quietly murmured in agreement. "Tomorrow," Zari continued, "many of the navies here will take part in the International Fleet Review. You will represent Iran with pride." He scanned the formation one final time. "Rest well tonight, say your prayers, and prepare yourselves." Then he nodded. "That is all." A senior petty officer stepped forward and shouted, "Company dismissed!" The sailors broke ranks and returned to their duties. Some sailors headed below decks, while others remained on the flight deck, looking out across the harbor. Lieutenant Ali Rahmani leaned against the railing and studied the scene. Warships filled the water in every direction. Flags he barely recognized flew from their masts. Beside him stood Navban Yar Yekum, Petty Officer First Class, Reza Farhadi, taking in the same view. Reza had sailed into foreign ports before. 3 years earlier, he had stood on this same deck when the ship entered Rio de Janeiro during its long deployment in 2023. Crowds had gathered along the Brazilian waterfront to photograph the Iranian frigate as it passed the harbor entrance. A few other naval vessels had been in port at the time, but nothing like this. The gathering in India was on an entirely different scale. Dozens of navies assembled in one place. By midday, the pier outside the ship was alive with activity. Indian naval personnel escorted groups of visitors along the dock, and several were invited aboard the Dana as part of the exercise's cultural exchange. A pair of Iranian sailors stood near the gangway, acting as informal guides. Beside them, Lieutenant Mehta helped manage the steady flow of visitors moving along the pier. As the assigned liaison officer, he occasionally stepped in to translate or clarify questions from the international guests. "This is Dana, one of our newest frigates," one Iranian sailor explained in careful English. "Built in Iran." He gestured toward the forward deck. "She carries anti-ship missiles, surface-to-air systems, torpedoes, and a vertical launching system." Several of the visitors leaned closer to photograph the equipment. Another sailor pointed toward the main gun mounted forward. 76mm naval gun, made in Iran." Arjun nodded politely as he helped guide the group along the pier, keeping the tour moving. Further down the dock, sailors from several countries gathered in relaxed conversation. Two French sailors approached a pair of Iranian crewmen and held up embroidered patches from their uniforms. "Exchange?" Within minutes, small squares of cloth changed hands. Nearby, several German sailors watched the friendly exchange while leaning against the pier railing. Language barriers hardly mattered. Sailors understood one another easily. The sea had its own language. Late in the afternoon, a few Indian sailors approached members of the Dana's crew. "There will be a celebration tonight at Milan Village," one of them said with an easy smile. "Music, dancing, food, girls. Many sailors are going." Milan Village had been set up by the Indian Navy inside the Eastern Naval Command area in Visakhapatnam. During the exercise, it had become a gathering place where sailors from dozens of navies could meet, eat, and watch concerts along the waterfront. Word had spread quickly through the harbor that the celebration would last well into the night. The Iranian sailors listened with interest. After weeks at sea, the thought of music, lights, and a crowded harbor festival was tempting. A petty officer standing nearby glanced toward Reza. "What do you think?" Reza looked out across the harbor. Warships from many nations lay tied along the piers, while others rested quietly at anchor farther out. "Would be interesting," he admitted. Several others joined the discussion. A few pointed out that many foreign crews would be there. It would be a good opportunity to meet them before the parade through the city the next day. For a moment, the group seriously considered going. Then Lieutenant Rahmani spoke. "Tomorrow we have the fleet review." The words hung in the air. At first light, the ships would sail out to sea and take their places in formation. Every maneuver would be watched by sailors and officers from navies around the world. The mood shifted. Reza nodded slowly. "The ship comes first." Another sailor agreed. "We represent Iran." A third added quietly, "And we thank Allah for bringing us here safely." For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the younger sailors spoke up. "Didn't the captain say we're supposed to get to know the other sailors? Learn from them and let them learn from us?" A few of the men exchanged glances. Some nodded faintly, but no one spoke. Reza stood at the rail looking out toward the harbor lights. Music from the waterfront drifted faintly across the water. He said nothing. Ali remained silent beside him. The Indian sailors waited politely for an answer. At last, the Iranian crew thanked them for the invitation. No one said anything more. Across the harbor, the first lights of the stage at Milan Village began to glow as evening settled over Visakhapatnam. Along the waterfront, crowds gathered while street vendors rolled carts toward the promenade, lighting charcoal grills that sent thin columns of smoke drifting into the warm night air. Hawkers called out to passing sailors, "Fresh kebabs! Hot biryani! Spiced fish!" Paper plates moved from hand to hand as sailors from many nations gathered along the promenade. Then the music began. Drums echoed across the harbor as colored lights flickered to life along the waterfront stage. Laughter and voices rose with the rhythm of the festival as the celebration for the visiting fleets came alive. Lieutenant Arjun Mehta stood near the edge of the crowd with a glass of juice in one hand, watching the scene with an easy smile. His white uniform jacket was no longer perfectly pressed after a long day in the humid heat, and the collar sat slightly looser than it had that morning. Every so often, his eyes drifted across the gathering in a quiet sweep, an old habit, before he turned back toward the music. Beside him, Sub-Lieutenant Priya Nair had already been pulled closer to the center of the crowd. Her uniform showed the same signs of the long, tropical day, the fabric slightly creased, the sleeves faintly damp from the heat, but the tiredness only seemed to make her laugh more easily as she clapped along with the beat. The band shifted songs. A familiar rhythm burst from the speakers. Jai-ho! The opening notes sent a ripple through the crowd. Sailors who had been standing along the edges suddenly moved toward the dance area, and a cheer rose from the waterfront as dozens of uniforms surged forward. The dance floor filled almost instantly. Priya laughed in surprise as the music swelled around her. That was when a young sailor stepped beside her. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer and said something over the music. Priya looked at him, surprised, then grinned. A moment later, the two stepped into the growing circle of dancers as the drums and voices of Jai-ho thundered across the harbor. Across the crowd, Arjun noticed the movement. He lifted one eyebrow slightly, amused, but said nothing. He simply took another sip from his glass and watched the lights flash across the dancing crowd. Under the bright stage lights, uniforms from across the world moved together in the warm Indian night. From the deck of the Dana, several Iranian sailors watched the distant lights and listened to the music rolling across the water. For a moment, they stood quietly at the rail. Then, one by one, they drifted away toward their compartments below deck. But sleep did not come easily. The music from Milan village carried clearly across the harbor, the drums and laughter echoing against the dark water. Some sailors returned to the weather decks, leaning on the rails and watching the distant lights. Others used their phones to call or message family back home after weeks at sea. From time to time, a few figures crossed the gangway together and headed toward the pier, while others lingered along the rail, watching the distant festival. Some walked down to stretch their legs or find something warm to eat from the food stalls before liberty expired. The festival continued late into the warm Indian night, its music drifting across the harbor toward the silent warships anchored in the darkness. And somewhere out beyond the harbor, the sea waited for morning.